So we have the beginnings of a profile page. Let's go and fetch a particular user and populate this. Right? So let's do that. We'll need to, what we'd like to be able to do is in that controller, unload, right, on this controller, which we don't have yet, unload, we would like to be able to go fetch that particular user. All right? So let's do that. So this will be new. This will be profile controller client.html. Okay. So the controller is going to look like something like this. It's going to say, again, we're going to put it inside of an iffy. Right? Did I just call that HTML? Oh, oops. Let's rename this as JavaScript, JS. Okay, there we go. All right, so what we're going to do is that unload when the document finishes loading. I'm going to call the init function here. So this is the init function. And what we're going to do, we're going to go and fetch the user by ID. Right? So let's take a look at that. This could be, we'll need the service. So this will be a var user service equal new user service client. There it is. And here we're going to say find user by ID. And this is going to say we already know the user ID is 12, say. And this will implement this as function find user by ID, and this is the user ID, right? And so the controller's responsibility is not to render any of this, right? Is to delegate that to a service, and the service is going to have that. So user service is going to actually find the user by ID, right? And we pass the user ID as an argument, and we're going to presumably render the user, right? So this is the controller's responsibility. That's where the controller ends, right? So it's going to get our user ID, and then in here, console log user, right? Okay, so that's a nice distinction between what the controller does and what the service does. Right? It doesn't know, the controller has no idea how to get that. It delegates that. The service will respond and then says, I'll render that. I'll pass it on to the UI for rendering. All right, we don't have this find user by ID in the service. Let's implement that. Okay, let's go and implement that in the user service. So the user service is down here. Notice that that's why the user service, notice that it's being used by two controllers, right? It's being used by the user admin controller. It's being used by the profile controller. It certainly can also be used by the login controller, by the register controller, right? So this one service kind of should be kind of like a singleton, right? Instance that is used across all multiple controllers, right? It's ambivalent on who actually is using it, right? It's just providing data to anybody who cares, okay? And it specializes on user data, right? It doesn't know anything about anything else about courses and sections and enrollments and students. It only is handling just user. All right, so let's do the find all users. Let's implement find user by ID. There it is. So we'll say find user. Oh, I'm sorry. We do want this up here. So let's implement it. Let's let's implement that here. So function find user by ID. Here's the user ID, and it's going to do something similar to the delete user, but instead of a delete, right, it's just going to use the default. And this is there's going to be JSON that comes back this time around. So we will parse it before we send it back. So we're going to take the response and parse it out. the controller gets it nice parsed out from the request body. All right, so if we try this out and refresh, notice that we got an error. Let's look at the error. And if we look at the network, notice that we went out to fetch a user's whose ID was 12. Notice that we passed it along, but it came back as saying that there's no method allowed that takes an ID, right? There's one that takes no IDs, right? But it's not that one. We want the one that has an ID, and we don't have that. So let's go to the server and actually implement that, right? So let's go to the server, and here we'll implement another get mapping, right? It's expecting a get request, but it's expecting also a user ID at the end, right? And the function call is going to be find user by ID. I'm just calling it the same so that I keep track of these straight in my head. Okay, so and then here we're going to do parse the path variable whose name is user ID, and we're going to populate an integer user ID. Once we have that, we can then say a repository dot find. Let's see, find by ID. There it is, find by ID. Okay, and pass in the user ID as an argument, and find all by ID. Notice that it returns find. Oh, I'm sorry, find by ID. Okay, find by ID. All right, and then this is user ID. And this returns. Oh, okay. I think it returns an optional because it could return null, right? And so you want to be able to handle it gracefully. So optional user data, and then let's load the optional. Is this one? Wait, what does it return? CROD optional. Is it util? Util import. Is that it? Okay, looks like it's happy. And then we can ask data dot is present. So is present say is this null, right? Is this object null? So if it is present, then we can just return data. We can say return data dot get, and get returns what? Let's see, type mismatch. Blah, blah. I'm sorry. Oh, okay, user, right? There we go. Get. Okay, that worked. Otherwise, we're going to just return null. Okay. All right. Okay. I think that'll work. Let's try it out. Right. Let's restart the server. Restart the server. Anytime we make any changes on the server, we have to restart the server, unfortunately. Right. It has to recompile, repackage, and everything. All right. There we go. Looks like it didn't blow up. Let's refresh this time around. Now this time, notice that it did come back. So 12 is for Bob Hope, right? That has that password. Typically, we would scrub that out. Right? We wouldn't return the actual passwords. We would remove that. But now that we have the object, right, we can now populate the profile page. So let's do that. Let's take a look at that. So to populate, we can pass it along to where? Let's see, find. Notice that who printed this? Oh no, actually we didn't print it. Let's see in the console. Did we print it? Yeah, see that? We printed it to the console. Who did that? The controller, right? We had already written the controller to do that, right? There it is, right? So it was pass it to render user, and the render user is just printing it out to the console, right? Instead, what we want to do is populate the form. So what we could do is that in the form, we could just give it IDs. So I think we did already, right? So here we have the read-only field for static email, right? So we can grab all those things. So here we can create variables, static email. Okay, I'm going to put a $ in front of it, meaning that these are going to be objects that are going to be retrieved from the DOM with jQuery. Right? These are not going to be just plain old variables or DOM elements. They're going to be jQuery elements. Right? So that's why I'm putting a $ in front of it, just to remind myself that these are jQuery objects. Okay. What else do we need? We need the. I'm not going to do anything with the password. We'll do the first name. So let's grab that too. So that's $ first name and var $ last name. So let's do those. All right. So on init, I'm just going to retrieve all these. So I'm going to say static email is going to say $ fetch me the element whose ID is not first name, static email. There we go. Right. And we're going to do the same thing for all these. So first name, and this will be first name. It'll be last name. Right, so once we load, we from the DOM, we retrieve these elements. They're ready to go whenever I want to populate them. So here in the render, this is where I'm going to populate it. I'm going to say, grab the static email that you grabbed earlier. It's an input field, right? It's a read-only input field, but change its value. Change it to user.email. Email. And same thing for the first name. Change it to change the input field's name to first name. And same thing with last name. Oops. Last name and last name. Okay. So let's try it out. And there it is. Right. We have the Bob. And the email didn't work. Why? Oh, we have username. We don't have email. Okay. All right, that's fine. We'll change this to username. Username. Okay, we have Bob, but we don't have a last name? Last name? Really? Okay. All right, so there we go. So we have capability of being able to retrieve an individual user and update the user interface. We need to go the other way around too, right? If we make changes over here, right, and we click on update, we need to go and be able to send that over to the server for update. Let's do that next.